Okay, I'd like to kick off the event. My name is Peter Glynn. I'm the Vice President of the Ireland chapter of PMI, and I'd like to welcome everyone this afternoon, this lunchtime, to our webinar event that is on ESG and the whole area of how we report as project managers. So it's a really exciting event. I'm very excited about it, and I'd like to welcome all of our speaker panel, including Tom, obviously, who is leading out on our community of practice. We've now run a number of events through our sustainability community of practice. There's been fabulous feedback, and I'm also really excited about this event and about how we engage in with the PM profession and beyond. Just in my welcome, I'd just like to share a few areas with you. So again, I'd like to say a very big welcome into everyone who is on this event here at lunchtime. I want to bring your attention to our 25th anniversary party that we're running later this year on September 29th. It'll be a really fun event. We're expecting about 200 people. It'll be an open invite to the membership and non-members. It'll be held in the sort of Guinness storehouse in Dublin, and we've got an action-packed event, and we'll have a few exciting things happening in the evening. So I would highly encourage you all to attend, and we will be launching this very, very shortly. So I would, that if you keep an eye out for the launch of the details of the event. The other area I'd like to draw your attention to is the National Project Awards, which we will be launching shortly. And this builds on the success of the awards that we have run over recent years. This will be launching over coming weeks, and we look forward to having some really good submissions as we've had in previous years. And the event that is including our black tie dinner will be run on November 9th, but we will be launching details on that very, very shortly. Finally, I just wanted to share that for anybody who has not registered through the website as a PMI member logged on, you'll be aware that you may need the PDU code so that you can claim the credits for this event. And I have the code on screen here. Hopefully everyone can see this. But for anybody who did log on to the website in their registration, the sort of code will be automatically allocated out into your membership account. So again, I'd just like to say a very big welcome to everyone, and I'm now going to hand over into Tom, who is leading out on our sustainability community of practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I might ask Rebecca to share the slides there. So first of all, I just really want to welcome everyone. Thank you for attending. This is the second event that we have as part of the community, sustainability community of practice. And we are obviously, as we stated at the outset, looking to bring project managers together, really just share experiences, best practice, and upcoming trends, particularly focused in the area of sustainability. We are, for this session, we're aiming to have it covered in about 45 minutes. And maybe actually, if you wouldn't mind, Rebecca, just moving on to the next slide. So we're aiming about 45 minutes. The first 10 minutes being a bit of a step through introductions, a bit of scene setting. And then we'll start the panel discussion. So we really do welcome questions from the audience. The more engagement that we get, the richer obviously the dialogue will be. And for those questions, please do use the Teams chat here. And we can definitely pose those questions to our speakers. I want to thank everyone who has actually sent in questions in advance. I think we'll probably start off with these and then move on to the other questions as they come. But please do pose any questions that you have. We're delighted to have two industry experts today to be able to share their insights, I guess the trends that they've observed within the ESG area, and particularly any ideas that they have in terms of how things may pan out. And what it's probably fair to say is a relatively nascent area for some project managers, probably more than others. Firstly, we have Durarka Dennis, who's EY's lead for climate change and sustainability services. And we also have Louise Keating, who is partner in the EY Finance Transformation team. I have, obviously, I'm the head of the Sustainability Community of Practice. I think just maybe at the outset, I'd just like to welcome any questions and also feedback from people. I've included my email address just in the footer there, so please feel free to contact me in terms of the future direction of this community of practice. But I think just without any further ado, I think I might invite Durarka to speak just to the next slide, please.
Super. Thanks, Tom. Delighted to be with you here this afternoon, everybody. Really exciting area, ESG reporting, and I think anyone who's working in a project management role is going to be in the heart of that. It's a very exciting space. What has happened over the last number of years is the regulation has developed, challenges have evolved, and what you can see on the screen here is it's a global issue. It's a global challenge, and there's various kind of calls coming from investors, wider stakeholders, businesses themselves saying we need to be consistent, we need comparability. So with that is coming in this whole sustainability reporting, I suppose, mandate or request, and looking at very clear standards, whether there's the international sustainability standards or whether it's the CSRD. There's various standards in place. What it is requiring is really clear coordination, because as you can see on that map, there's different jurisdictions and each one has a view. So that's where they kind of yourselves come very much into the forefront. How do you set up and structure a project that will enable a business to understand the reporting that is required in different jurisdictions, so that as a kind of a lead in a project or as a role, a commercial role as well, that you might be understanding of, well, actually, we need to think about how we write our business in a particular jurisdiction because there is a challenge. The other piece that's coming through is the desire to have information that is gathered by organizations and audited in the future period. So right now you have this as a kind of a voluntary area in most organizations. They're not mandated to have their sustainability KPIs reviewed and audited by an external party, but you will see that people do it. With the new regulation coming in and with the new view that assurance will become the norm, I think it's going to become very clear that structure and organisation and having information in a way that can be assessed by a third party will become more and more important. So a role of a project manager is going to be instrumental here. Might just move on in terms of the actual reporting requirements that are probably more relevant to the next slide, if you don't mind. That are relevant as we look at the European, there's the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that is coming in across Europe. And what's a little bit different about this particular directive is it actually applies to anyone who writes business across Europe. So as it comes in, it will take in various parties at different points in time. None of you here today need to be an expert in terms of how that lands. But what it means in simple terms is people who are currently reporting under the Non-Financial Reporting Directive will be required to apply it from next year. People who sit in large companies across Europe, as defined by European legislation at the moment. So a large company is an organisation that has more than 250 employees, 40 million in turnover, or 20 million in assets, and two of the three, and you may hit that criteria. They'll come in 2025, reporting in 26, and then other third-party jurisdictions will come later, and that's US reporters, US listed individuals, Swiss listed, UK listed. So everybody is going to be caught by this over time. And what is going to happen is you will find that most organisations across Ireland, UK and Europe and globally are now standing up projects that say we need to understand what this means, when it will hit us and how to manage it. And the big difference is right now, people are used to standing up technology projects. They might look at a finance project. They might look at a sustainability project. projects under the CSRD regulation are actually going to incorporate all of those. You're going to need to know about your supply chain. You're going to need to know about your financial impact. You're going to need to know about your technology platforms and integrating data and good information. So there's quite a lot coming at the organizations that you all work for, because each organization will have to consider when this hits them, how it hits them, and how you might choose to address the problems that come out of any gaps identified or any challenges put in particular jurisdictions. So while the reporting in itself, you know, you can see what it might ask, it actually asks the organization to talk to each other in a different way. So, you know, the Treasury, the Finance, the Sustainability, and the PMO teams will all need to sit around the table and work together. So quite exciting times. There are very explicit standards. So the top half of the slide, you'll see the timing of when these, when each area will come through. The bottom half of the slide, there's a kind of a reference to the set of the environmental standards that are going to be reported under the SRSs. So, you know, as you look at a project, they're the standards you'll have to apply, and the timeline is at the top. So fundamentally, a lot of work to be done across organizations. I might just jump into the next slide for a second, because I'm hoping that you don't want to all become experts in CSRD, otherwise I'll have no job, and nor Louise. But what is really important, and this is where I think, you know, rubber hits the road, how integrated is your ESG reporting with your actual corporate strategy? And you will see when you look at various organizations today, there is challenges around greenwashing, that word we all hate to hear about. And there's also green blushing. There's people who do a lot more than they're telling you they're doing. So maybe you're one of those. But there is a piece about saying within the organization, how integrated is your corporate strategy as it sits today with actually your sustainability strategy, and bringing those together. I think that's going to be really important. So, you know, you will have some people who very much say, well, no, I want to be out there as a leader. I'd say in corporate Ireland, I'm not sure there's too many of them out there, but there are some, I'm sure. So it's thinking about, you know, is your business driving and taking the opportunity of sustainability and the sustainability agenda to create new markets, new behaviors, and incentivize people to operate in line with the sustainability strategy and leverage off it, to be honest, and define value creation within the sustainability lens. You know, that's way at the top end. You have other people saying, well, look, I know I need to do it, but I just want to get the pass grade, Dorarca. Guess what? Pass is good enough for me. But I think from a PMO perspective, there's always an opportunity to think about project management, an opportunity, because there's lots of opportunities. The more familiar you become with kind of what sustainability strategy looks like and what the requirements are, you may be able to, as you look at any project, whether it's an investment in CapEx, whether it's a new product line, whether it's investment in talent, whether you're looking at the talent agenda, all of those areas will actually have an aspect that links into sustainability. So there are various elements, and I would say as people think about, you know, organizational change and being involved in project management, it is really important maybe on every agenda to say, actually, what's the sustainability angle on this? Is this a new product? Is this causing a product to be actually challenged? You know, should we be making a really clear play on that this is aligned to a strategic sustainability agenda for our clients? So I think the integration of the ESG strategy and the corporate strategy is something you'll see a lot of people talking about going forward, and something that needs to be thought through as to how you do it. And as I say, you don't want to be down at the bottom being a defensive player saying, you know, this is a problem. Really, we're not there. We're, you know, nothing to see here, mate. You might want to see you'd be more towards the maturing or strategic player. Apologies, there's a bit of mood music in terms of my dogs in the background. So I think it's something to think about, but you as a kind of a project management lead may want to say, well, actually, how do I feel this fits within what I'm doing today? And how do I move that agenda forward, and maybe pose that challenge as to what the opportunity is? Because I think, honestly, there are lots of opportunities. It's about aligning the thoughts and bringing things together. I'm going to pass over to Louise, who's going to talk about a slightly different angle for a second before we jump into the Q&A.
Perfect. Thanks, Dorarca. I'm delighted to be here with you this afternoon and sharing some insights on ESG reporting. As Dorarca had mentioned, you know, there are many reporting requirements as part of ESG, depending on the size of the organization, the sector that you're in, and geography. But the data requirements are going to be key. So there's financial and non-financial, including some data requirements from third-party suppliers who may be very small operations. So you need to really consider the supply chain, and they may struggle with providing some of the data that's going to be required on these regulations going forward. But it is much more than the mandatory reporting requirements, I would say. Organizations also need to track their performance and improvements to drive action. So for example, an organization may have a strategy and they need to report what are the actuals. They need the KPIs for monitoring performance, and then they also need to forecast what those KPIs are going to look like in the future. So on this slide here, I'm just going to touch upon a few of the items that I see as, important from a reporting perspective. So if we look at data, as I had mentioned, it's going to be key. And if you look at the technology selection that's next to it here, you can put any technology solution on top of data. But if the data, as you know from other projects, isn't of high quality, if there's errors in it, if it's not the data attributes that you need, no technology solution is going to meet these requirements. So you need to look at your internal and external data sources. You need to coordinate the data collection and manage and analyze that data. There'll be new data collection templates that are going to be required. The validation and calculation is very important, because as Dorarka had mentioned, there is an assurance part on this, and more so in the future. And it'll be a bit like your year-end financial statements, and that's where finance come into it. If you need assurance on these numbers, you need to be able to stand over them. You also need to build a data model that's different to what you may have built for previous projects, and then identify where there's current gaps and provide solutions. So you may not be able to close the gap, in 3 to 6 months, but you need to have a plan on how you're going to do that. I would say from a technology perspective, a lot of the technologies are at very early stages, as the requirements aren't, fully confirmed yet, and as our new regulations, there will be changes over the next few years. But some of the technology tools that are in the market are Tagetik, SAP, Microsoft, Workiva, Enablon, and there's some more specific niche ESG reporting tools in the market as well. But of course, all the big players are also trying to advance their technologies to be able to meet these requirements. And these technology platforms are required to drive the insights. We see across some clients at the moment, they're trying to collect the data manually on Excel, and that's not going to be sufficient going forward, given the scrutiny that they'll have on the reports and the level of assurance that will be required as well. And also when you look at the increase in volumes and the increase in number of organizations that are going to have to comply with these regulations, of course, the technology providers are going to be coming out with solutions to meet those needs. Then just on implementation, it's similar to any projects that, project managers would be used to running. So you need to look at what are the translation of the, regulations into what the business requirements are. And then the business requirements need to be clearly documented and ensure a lens of standardization is applied to those processes. Controls are going to have to be built on the process as well. There's going to be new internal controls required. You're going to need automation of processes as well. And you're also going to need to, all of that output from workshops during the implementation and documented. And it impacts end-to-end organization. Every part of the operating model is going to be impacted. It will also drive investment and capital allocation decisions. So as Dorarka had mentioned there, if there's a product that an organization is thinking of launching, does it actually comply with the ESG strategy of the organization? And I think that ESG lens needs to be applied to all decisions that are made, and then performance measures and forecasting, as I've mentioned, to be able to measure those KPIs going forward. But that new, target operating model is going to need to be defined. Who's going to own the process? Who's going to design and document the processes for the organization? You're going to need training in the new processes as well. And then identifying any future reporting requirements. So as I said, these are new. So you're going to need to future-proof your solutions so that in the future, for any changes, that it doesn't impact, or it's not going to be massive change to the processes that you've built. And coming back to that point where, it operates, or it impacts end-to-end, it impacts all parts of the organization, your operations, supply chain, HR, sales, marketing, finance. So when you think of the communications team, have a lot of work to do in relation to this as well. The ESG strategy of the organization needs to be clearly communicated. Again, back to Dorarka's slide on, you can be at different levels, but if you've agreed as an organization that you want to be leading, well, then that impacts all of the organization, and that communication needs to be consistent across the organization as well. HR policies would also need to be linked with, sustainability. Training on sustainable practices would be required for the teams, and you need to embed a culture that ensures the decisions made are aligned with the organization's vision and strategy, as I mentioned. And you won't, achieve the vision from an ESG perspective when you have teams within different business units having different goals or not being clear on what the actual overall target for ESG is. Okay, and then testing, similar to any project or technology implementation. I suppose the complexity here is there might be a lot of external third-party data as well. So it's how you ensure that you're testing that you have the quality and completeness of that data as well, which may be more complex than data that's within the control of your organization. And then finally, so project management, as you're all familiar with it. So again, it's just establishing what those goals and objectives are, making sure there's a design authority as well, ensuring that if there are gaps in current data, what are the solutions and what is the timeline to be able to get that data in place for the organization, and what decisions need to be made. And as I mentioned, managing the coordination of that third-party data and stakeholders across the different work streams, and including then the risks and issues that you identify. So I think at a high level, there are some of the reporting considerations that we're seeing and our clients are asking us about, but I think we're happy to go into Q&A now, and you may have more specific questions for us.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that, both. We probably can lose the screen share now, just and just kind of, I guess, zone in and just really on the conversation part now. And I do, as I mentioned, I do have some questions that were fielded just in advance, so I might just step through them, because I know some of them probably just touched off elements of your presentation, but again, it might just spark some further discussion. So, and maybe even just kind of at the outset, Dorarca, you were saying just talking about almost kind of that cycle of developing sustainability strategies. But are you seeing kind of what that kind of like those update cycle is? Is it typically kind of 18 months, 3 years, 5 years? Because obviously it's a very fast moving space at the moment.
Yeah, great question, Tom. And look, I suppose at the moment people are resetting their strategy. So I've worked with clients over the last number of years developing strategy, but because of the impending guidance, particularly the European guidance, it requires people to look at things they do a double materiality assessment. They look at it from a sustainability impact perspective and a finance perspective. So people are actually saying, hang on a second, what is my strategy? What does it look like? But also the reporting piece is actually asking people to this. Louise referred to data there. There's 1,400 data points that you need to report on. Okay, so that's quite a lot of data. So people are saying, okay, well, let's see what this looks like. So they are resetting the strategy. I would expect, like any other strategy, you don't revisit it every year, because obviously the strategy needs to be set for a number of years. People are setting kind of a 3-year strategy at the moment. And I think people are choosing not to look beyond 3 years, Tom, because there's so much change coming. So I think at the moment, what I can tell you is my clients are typically going, yeah, I know I did it 18 months ago, but I'm doing it afresh now, but I want it to be good, inverted commas, for another 3 years, and to play on the kind of 24 to 27 strategy is what we're seeing people do. And I think that's probably an appropriate time frame, because within the first 12 months of that 24 months, there's a bit of road testing in terms of what does good look like, where are the bigger impacts. So there may be nuanced changes, but people are trying to set a kind of a 3-year track. But I think the acknowledgement is, if something big were to occur or a change of direction were to occur, there might be a reset, but not a total refresh of strategy, if that makes sense. You're on mute.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
Prize for me.
You caught me. But I guess kind of with that frequency of updating of what that strategy may be, because obviously the strategy itself is going to then dictate what type of project managers are going to be running with. I can just imagine that it's the life cycle for those projects is probably going to have to be relatively brief in certain areas anyway.
Yeah, I think Tom, and I'll let Louise come in after this, but like there's a piece here now that people are saying, well, I need to now do formal reporting. I need to get ready for formal assurance of some form. So that the projects at the moment are very focused on, am I doing what I say I'm doing? Is does the writing on the can reflect the reality? So we're working with clients who are having to determine whether they meet the criteria of the impending reporting legislation. Where are the gaps? And I suppose the short sprint projects are, and how big is the gap? Can I fix the gap, or do I have to live with the gap? Really big exercise to be done around data choice and technology support that people are a bit afraid of, and Louise will share more on that in a second. And there's also a piece about saying this reset is really important, but if my wider stakeholder community wants to understand my story, I have to get the report right, shake that down, shape it, know where my gaps are, and then build on resources, time management, and kind of red, amber, green ratings, and go for the red ones and work their way through. In terms of long term, I think that's the realistic approach right now, because it's such a big agenda. It's just going to be part of the DNA going forward, but it is just to set the stall out in the first instance so no one is caught short. And I think that's where most of my clients are saying, don't be caught short, want to understand it. Louise, you probably have a perspective as well in terms of process and technology.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, yeah, to your point, Darky, their clients are looking at their strategy now, and that is that short, brief, phase zero piece. But actually, the longer term project, I think, isn't brief at all, because if you think of where you need to get the data, it's a technology implementation. I relate it back to, from my banking days, it's like your bank regulatory projects. You need to have your templates, but not only that, you also need your MI, as I had mentioned, that your KPIs, your forecasting, your data. So the strategy, yes, might be brief initial piece, but I do see the wider end-to-end operating model being, potentially 12 to 18 months to get everything in place.
And that'll be doing quite well, I think.
Yeah,
because we are seeing in reality is, and everybody on this call will see this, they get involved in projects, is there is definitely a gap between what people maybe perceive to be the kind of where they are in the sustainability reporting space and where they need to be. So, even this week working with two different clients, if I was to look at their external communications, I had a sense that they were actually maybe up here. But actually, when I started working through the data and the reporting they need to do, and the existence of policies, the existence of controls, they just weren't there to the level that the new regulation will require them. So I think it's not that people haven't tried to do it, it's just they weren't mandated to do it. So now there's a big lift in a short period that will bring everybody to a nice level playing field, she says. And then there's going to be really exciting times saying, well, actually, how do we now differentiate in our strategy and get to that differentiating strategy?
Yeah.
And it goes back to that
point. So if your strategy just to be, on the maturity curve, to be just meeting the basic requirements, that's going to be a shorter term. But if you have really focused and your strategy is to be leading, well, then that's going to take a longer term to actually really implement across the organization.
And actually, you're kind of almost touching off kind of one of the other questions that was posed, and it's actually just about the in-flight projects that an awful lot of organizations currently have that impact data. I guess kind of how to re-engineer those in-flight projects to try and incorporate probably, which would be a new scope area really, and with from what you described, significant added complexity.
Yeah. And I think across, as PMs, everyone would understand the challenges of data, whatever project you're implementing, whether it's ESG or any customer system. So like the majority of organizations have big pain points and challenges with the quality of data. And as we mentioned, we're bringing in non-financial data now that organizations may be less experienced in dealing with, and the third party, supply chain piece of it as well. So there's a lot more complexity to it, I would say. But I think in any project that people are involved in these days, coming back to the operating model, you need to have that ESG lens. So ask the questions. Is there going to be an ESG impact on this process, this new system, and look at the data framework around that. I know a lot of my clients are going through ERP, say, upgrades now because of systems going out of support. So you need to bring in that ESG lens to the data requirements as well on these ERP upgrades, because you don't want to realize that you've built a solution and in a couple of years down the road, then it's not fit for purpose when it comes to ESG, and it just costs and way more, and then it takes much longer to implement as well.
And there's a really good point there Louise is making. It's quite important at this point as you're looking at your project. There's probably a kind of a decision saying, is, whatever technology you use, does it have a good ESG reporting tool / platform? Or actually, are you happy to stand with a separate ESG or reporting tool that then has kind of links through to the reporting modules that you need to have for external reporting purposes? And that's quite a tough choice, because lots of organizations already have an EHS system, because look, if you're in any world of manufacturing or anyway producing stuff, you're going to have an EHS kind of environmental health and safety is not gone away, guys. It's incorporated in all this reporting. So you have that. So clients are kind of having to think about, well, do I have an add-on to this? Do I scrap that and use something new? So that thought process is really important. And I think there's a piece about testing the appetite to see what might work best, but also looking forward, not just thinking about today's projects, because today's projects may be mid-flight or coming to end, but what are you going to need? So it's critical, I think, for this group to challenge based on line of sight of all the projects, but also saying, well, actually, do you do a kind of an assessment of the tools that are available for the type of industry that we're in, and make a decision, best informed as you can be today. As Louise says, there's many that are continuing to develop their tools from a technology perspective, but you have to kind of work with what you have. So I think it's a really critical thing to think about, make a decision and move on, because the data piece will take longer than you expect, as with all projects.
Thank you for that. And I guess it probably, again, you're leading on to one of the other questions that was asked very neatly. When do you kind of think it is the kind of the appropriate time for companies to actually engage with these ESG projects and programs, particularly given that you have, as you were saying, kind of from a systems perspective, maybe not clarity within the market in terms of what best practice is?
Well, in terms of the projects, I'm going to jump in on this one. Sorry, Louise. I think yesterday, you can't, if you're not really talking about doing ESG and how you're going to report on it. So I mentioned earlier on that it's going to come in a phased basis. So if you're already somebody who's doing the non-financial reporting directive, it's going to apply to you from 1 January 24 with reporting in 2025. So I think if you're working in that domain and there's a conversation not being had, you might be doing a paper-based exercise for your reporting in 2025, because there's a lot to do. But many Irish organisations will come in the mid-tier, so 2025 reporting in 26. So I think now is the time to start the conversation, to be asking, as Louise says, any project you're doing, what's the ESG implication? Have we thought about it? Bringing the sustainability question to the table, so that it does start as a conversation, really needs to be, hopefully that's why you're all here listening to us, actually.
Yeah.
That you're already talking. So I think it's now or yesterday, to be quite honest.
And then I guess from a practical point of view, oh, sorry.
Can I just add one thing there?
Yeah.
Sorry. If you're sitting here working for a US multinational and you're saying, we're good, years ahead, I would say you're working in a much more complex environment, and really important to have that conversation, as important as a European reporter. So there's many Irish organizations that are headquartered in the US. And I would genuinely say that the US, because they're much larger global organizations, the reporting is actually going to be quite challenging, because it's global reporting if you transact in Europe by 28 and 29. So it's everything you do worldwide, not just your European operation. So again, another organization, might say, well, we need to do it very quickly because it's our European operations. If it's global, there's other implications, and there's much more structuring and much more challenge, because you have probably jurisdictions that don't require the European reporting, but another form of reporting. So just a little bit more complexity there. So if anyone's sitting feeling really comfortable, I'm sorry to make you feel uncomfortable, because you're also in this exciting times.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you to the brave soul who has put in the first question in the chat there. And so we have another question just from the floor. We have privacy by design for technology projects. Would the panel see the development of ESG by design templates and checklists?
I think so, because I think, as with any project, the more templates that we have, more structure around it. The particular technology you're talking about, I'm not aware of. It was a policy by design, Tom, you said?
Privacy by design.
Privacy by design, yeah. I can see, we have our own methodologies as well, but within EY. So all organizations are going to be creating their methodologies for ESG reporting.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we're seeing in the market as well, anyone who's reporting have SOX controls already in place are looking at how they would then kind of do an uplift on their ESG reporting to a SOX level of control as well. So I think absolutely we will see processes that are kind of consistent across businesses. But as Louise says there, at the moment, many organizations are creating something that's kind of fit for purpose within their organization to meet kind of the level that they believe they can get to. But absolutely, we'll have to have something that's consistent across everybody in due course.
And maybe just to touch back on an earlier area that you were kind of skirting around, I guess, but one of the, I guess, for those of us in the audience, this is to some of us, it's relatively new. What would you see as kind of those key skills that will be required by project managers to really run successful ESG projects or even sustainability related projects in your view?
Yeah, I think the key skills that PMs have always needed will continue for ESG. It's that coordination, making sure things are being run according to project plan. But I think in addition, there's probably a little bit around the stakeholder engagement skills as well, because of the end-to-end impact that ESG has within an organization. And also, as these regulations are new, there's a bit of uncertainty and ambiguity around on how to deliver the projects. As if you're running a similar project year after year, you become more experienced with it, and the pitfalls to look out for, where there potentially could be certain gaps. So I would say be open to learning about that, asking the questions if you're not sure, and that will help as well. And then as the controls framework will also be an important part of any ESG project, and also so having a solution that's flexible. We mentioned it, earlier, because these regulations are new. It's how we become flexible and adapt to change as the change comes in.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you, Louise. And I think the one thing that I think is challenging is the topic is so broad that for anyone who's kind of PM in this space, it's nearly kind of being a little bit literate as to the kind of what that looks like, kind of self-awareness and self-training, because I find with clients that, the more the PM who's run the project knows about the organization and the potential sustainability impacts, they can loop people in a way that's different. So I think it's because it does take the end-to-end piece. There's a little bit about knowledge of your own organization and being really clear in kind of what you do and not just the project that you're on. So if you're only somebody who's contracting, that can be harder, but if you're somebody who's integrated in the business, it's probably easier. And there's maybe a piece that the PM function within organizations needs to share to greater degree the various ongoing projects, so that you can have that line of sight and say, by the way, that should be brought into the ESG project because that's important. Because traditionally, I think we do our projects in a linear fashion, unless there's a very obvious connection, whereas this is one that it may be subtle connections that you need to say, oh, actually, we need to bring them in because that's relevant to this. So I think it's a great opportunity to learn about the breadth of a business, but it also challenges a PM to make sure that nothing has been missed. But I think the legislation will help. So being also tied to the person who's responsible for the ESG reporting, from whether that's been the sustainability team or the reporting team, to be really tight with them and have those check-ins will be really important as well, because as the legislation evolves, further requirements will come out that need to be built into the project plans.
And I guess it's just a couple of questions actually just sparked to mind. One of them would actually be, where does, and maybe Louise for yourself, because maybe it does or doesn't, and finance definitely has a role, but where do we see ESG reporting fitting and where it's being owned in organizations?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Tom, and Gerard has some experience with this as well. I think there's already been no clear ownership to date. Some organizations have the CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer, say, reporting into the CEO, some report into the CFO. But what is becoming clear, to your point, is that increased responsibility across finance. Because if finance need to report on the numbers, and there's a level of assurance required, they will need to ensure that the same controls are in place. There are similar data reporting to year-end financial statements and results. So they're going to definitely need to be more involved. But at the moment, I think it depends on the organization, with a lot of the CFOs that we're speaking to really understanding and I don't know whether accepting it is the right word, but that in the future that their role within ESG reporting is going to be much larger. So it'll be interesting to see where it lands. Yeah, and I might be slightly biased with my finance hat on. So Dwarka can give her thoughts too.
I think, to be honest, it's one of these ones. It's fascinating to watch, in the sense that I think there's probably data analysts, finance, and ESG, kind of traditionally sustainability leaders are needing to coalesce around this topic, because they are all very much involved. I think the finance, I think the challenge for many finance people, dare I say it, is that typically if you're in charge of finance, you're in charge of everything end to end, and it's your domain. So there's a bit of discomfort. Like, I have a meeting tomorrow with a client at 5 o'clock to arbitrate between the finance director and the chief sustainability lead as to who owns the ESG reporting role. And I mean, quite literally, I've been convened to help arbitrate, because they have excellent people on both sides who want to be very involved. But it's how do you get the structure that is right? Because you do need to have an understanding of finance, and this, particularly with the European legislation, where they have double materiality that brings in the finance focus. So you want to be using the same area. The other team that needs to be involved is risk, and thinking about the risk side, that you should be bringing sustainability risk into your risk registers. So I think it's not clear today, and I think it's a little bit around availability of resources, competency of individuals, and then making sure that you have that being the right person when they sit in sustainability or finance, and then having the counterpart involved as well. And I always say, if you could hire a good data analyst, you'd be doing well as well, because there's so much data involved. That's probably not a good answer for you, Tom. Sorry, it's a bit confused.
I was hoping for something clear cut, but obviously, again, it just shows that as you say, as you both said, stakeholder management is just going to be so critical in this. You're really just driving home, even in terms of that, from a reporting perspective, as purely as a project manager. You can just imagine it's quite a landscape to navigate.
Yeah, and I think what happens, if just to kind of bring that back a little bit. So people today who have very established sustainability functions quite often talk about greenhouse gas emissions, life cycle analysis, and very sustainability focused exercises that show how they write their business and how they do things. But they don't typically report that externally, bar on a voluntary basis, or through, a GRI or kind of voluntary reporting. And the difference here is you're actually coming into a mandated area, which has a structure, requires a framework, requires controls, and ultimately a form of assurance. So it's not necessarily the sweet spot of many sustainability leads to be developing that framework, which is why there's a huge opportunity for the PM function to bring together the skills of finance and sustainability to structure, I suppose, a subset within the organization that is kind of the ESG reporting office, if to be honest. And I think that's a huge opportunity for anyone in a PM role to help see what works best and pull it together, because I don't think either side have it right. And I think people here convened today will actually probably the people who could best pull together the right skill sets, the right talents, and build something that is a new and a fresh, and upskill themselves in the process.
Great. Thank you for that. I think we have just time for one more question. And again, this is just another one from the floor. Have you any thoughts on best practices for understanding an organization's customers' needs?
So we do have within the sustainability community a process of looking at this. You do a stakeholder analysis and materiality assessment. So, and there's a double materiality when it comes to the new legislation. So there is a process where there is a consultation with the key stakeholders externally as well as internally within a business. So the customers would be involved in that, Tom. So that's a very clear and well-established parameter that is done by many organizations to understand what their customers think is important and what they might ask of them, and does become very important when you come to sustainability reporting, because it is that broader context, not just the investor context.
And I might just have one more question for the road then, and this really kind of will be a parting one. What would you see as the call to action then for project managers? You know, kind of the people on this call, you know, to take away from this session.
I'll just go first. And I do think it's bringing that ESG lens in. So any project that you're working on, you know, asking the question, is there an ESG impact here? And how can we have those discussions then within the organizations to provide solutions?
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with that. I think it's about understanding your own organization and putting it on the agenda as part of a standard point, and seeing how to bring it forward. But I think anyone in a PM role will need to just ask the question first and see where it leads.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much. That was fascinating. I really want to thank you on behalf of everyone who's in attendance. Also, thank you to those who posed the questions. It really kind of helps to have a very informative and lively chat. Even kind of seeing how those grey areas, how there's definitely scope for those to be ironed out over the coming years, and I'm sure there will be kind of more standardization with you know, best practice, and perhaps not, kind of depending on the sector. It is such an interesting space. So there's clearly an awful lot more to be seen here, just as you say, kind of as this is being kind of more normalized and more brought into the mainstream. So thank you for that. It was fantastic. And I think we can probably leave it there then.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.